Welcome back to Root to Resilience, the podcast where we explore how to stay grounded, grow stronger, and reconnect with what really matters in times of change. I'm your host, Anupa, and today's episode feels especially relevant. We're living through unsettling times here in the UK. There's a growing sense of division, tension around identity, migration, and belonging. And it can all feel heavy, uncertain, and even disheartening at times. But I believe that moments like this invite us to rise with compassion, unity, and purpose to respond and not react. So, in that spirit, I'm joined by someone who truly embodies leadership through empathy and empowerment, Nyambe, the founder of Black Sherpa. Yam or Nyambe is a coach and the brilliant mind behind the Black Sherpa, a platform dedicated to helping underrepresented people overcome hidden challenges, build confidence, and create cultures of inclusion and respect. He's also an award-winning leader with over 20 years in life sciences and a passionate advocate for fair, human-centered workplaces. His work helps individuals and organizations climb the unseen mountains that stand between potential and possibility. So, Yam, it's such a pleasure to have you here on the Root to Resilience podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I talk about clarity, confidence, and community all the time, but I think you make it sound so much better. So really appreciate the warm welcome. I'm really excited about today's conversation. Actually, I was um I was in the gym this morning, which is the first time in a little while because as we were discussing, I've been feeling a little bit unwell. So your listeners might have to forgive me for a bit of a gravelly voice. But as I was talking with a friend about what we're up to today and the whole idea about resilience. I can't tell you about all of the conversation because it's not fit for this sort of respectable forum. But I think the message that I did leave with this whole idea about bouncing back, and actually, we probably don't bounce back the majority of the time. We ricochet back, but a slightly better version of ourselves based on the issues or the challenges that we've maybe had to take on. So, really looking forward to getting into this topic with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we might not bounce back right away. I think you can agree there's probably a messy middle at times, but that's okay too. But yeah, you've got a lot of experience in this and you share a lot of wisdom. We've had a couple of conversations previously, and I think we align on a lot of what our thoughts are. I think, first of all, let's begin with sharing why you do the work that you do and why you think it's important and why there's such a demand for it.
Cool. So, appreciate the question. I think you talked about my experience, 20 years in life sciences. And that's a space that I love within the UK, across the world. The work that's done in that sector to have an impact on people's lives, unbelievable. However, in the space that I've had the opportunity to work there, I see disparities in terms of access and opportunity to knowledge and information, which are free. But often the one thing that can have a significant difference on an individual's ability to apply themselves. And knowledge and information is often guarded so tightly. But I think being able to release that a little bit more would help to address some of the issues that we see when we talk about inequalities or inequities. And I suppose the space that I'm looking to play is in a world where we recognise isn't fair. What are the things that we can do to help individuals to take control, to lead their lives, to lead their careers, make the best possible choices with the best information just at the right time. So I think it's relevant. I think part of the work that I do though is creating a platform where it's easier for people to engage in that. And I think there's a mixture between forward-thinking organisations to a great extent. I see a lot of organisations very much trying to do the right things, but these are hard topics to really make big progress in. But aligned to that, I'm really passionate about again helping individuals to help themselves, and that comes from those three things that we touched on a little bit earlier on. How do we give people clarity? How do we help them to understand who they are, what they want, and how they can get it? How do we give people confidence to make the next step, even if it's just a small one? And how can we use community to support people? Because it's so important. I think life is hard, and not many people achieve anything by themselves. But with good community, you've got something there potentially to catch you if you fall, or if you're lost and not quite sure where that next step goes, hopefully that community can light the way for you, and that's something I'm a really big advocate for.
Yeah, so I mean, you're helping people to feel empowered even if they don't feel supported or they feel underrepresented, which I think is amazing. The work that you do is amazing, and I think it's definitely needed. It's unfortunate that there are some groups and some communities that may feel this way, but I think it's good to kind of take the mindset away from victim or injustice into empowerment, and there is a possibility and you can step into that. So I really support the work that you do. Now, I mentioned earlier in the intro that we here in the UK and possibly even across the world, we are going through divided times, and that can be quite unsettling. So, how do you think that, from the work that you do and what you've already explained, and from the space that you come from, where do you see individuals and communities, where do you see their role in staying grounded and united in these times?
So when maybe you think about that question, what is community? It's a big question in its own right. For me, community is a group of people that agree to grow together. And I think we see aspects of that in society in really big aspects. But ultimately, we also see the challenges of the frictions of people that are confused, people that are lost, people that don't trust. And those are where maybe some of the pain points are. And I think the power of the community in these times where we need to sort of stay grounded is to give you the perspectives that we need to be productive, to be part of the conversation, to stay in the game. I think often we give people advice about the importance of being able to stay calm so you can make good choices or behave in the right way. But I think the important message is that staying calm shouldn't be about becoming passive. I think it's important that we
Mm,
feel our feelings. Sometimes being unsettled is a real sign that you're awake, you're alive, you're not lost. But I
mm,
do think beyond there, community helps you to do a couple of things. Name what's real, like whether it's your feelings or what you're seeing. Can you use the power of community and conversation to really understand where are you right now? Um, you talked earlier on about whether it's here or other parts of the world where we see division. What is the division and what is potentially causing it? How do we make sure that we have a relationship with it that supports us as individuals first, and then potentially as communities later on? I think the other things that it can help you do is to check your values. I think having values is really powerful, and I think people have got values. Everybody's got values. I think sometimes being able to name them is a little bit more challenging. But I think having spaces where we agree what those values are, how they come to life, um, how we are personally accountable for them, how we hold others accountable for them, starts to become really, really powerful. And that, to me, is another, you know, fundamental grounding effect of being part of good communities. And that whole term around what's a good community, it's not easy to find your tribe these days. The world is changing. We spend
mm,
an inordinate amount of time, like we are right now, hooked up to a machine, talking to people online. Community's happening outside, right? Not everybody
mm.
knows the neighbours. Where does it start from that perspective before we get into what does it look like in the broader community or in the workplace? So there's maybe a couple of things that I believe having that rooting in community can really help in terms of helping you to have a real perspective on what's going on and how it relates to you personally for your values.
I found that really interesting because I think initially when I saw, like St. George's flags going up and things like that, my initial reaction was to feel a little bit of fear and a little bit of anger. And then when I started to reflect on it a little bit more, I kind of turned to compassion and kindness a little bit more. And I wanted to have these conversations with people. So I think this is what you're trying to say. Have those conversations, start those conversations about what does this mean for you? And if you see you're living in an area and you see your neighbours are putting up the St. George's flags, rather than have an instant judgment towards that person that you've been living next to for the past decade, why not have the conversation about, oh, what is your reasoning behind this? What is the intention? Because I think that we can kind of hold on to a narrative without understanding what the individual's thoughts and feelings are behind that. Do you agree with that?
To an extent. Um, but maybe using the flags as an example here, right? I've had a lot of conversations. I believe one of the things that I value most is my own networking community is pretty diverse. Um, it's been really obtuse. I've spoke to a lot of black people, a lot of minority people, a lot of brown people that are fuming and frustrated and annoyed by the flags that are going up. Not necessarily just in depraved places, but really nice villages, really quaint places that people wouldn't expect people to behave like this. By the same token, again, being really obtuse, I've spoken to a lot of white people that are perplexed in the same way, where they're like going, "Oh my God, what's going on here? Where did this happen? I didn't expect this to happen in my village." I think there's a couple of things that are going to be really important. There's a bit around that context. We know when it comes to the flags, for example, it might not have been your next door neighbours that put the flag up. Very different if it's hanging from their window or it's in a flagpole in the garden. But what we're seeing is a lot of people were in the roads around where they live, there are these flags. And actually, we know that people have been mobilised to put those flags up. The challenge is taking them down, right?
Mm,
And I think that's where people don't know what to do, whose job is to do it. And if you do that, what are the potential repercussions? If you don't know where those flags have come from, do we know who's watching when you potentially try to do that? And I do think it's a really hard position to be in sometimes in terms of how do you in your local area or community to agree and understand what do we want that to look like and who's responsible to take action. I'm a big Arsenal fan. I'd hate to quote somebody like Gary Neville, if you know who Gary Neville is, but I saw like a video that he posted online where he's talking about taking down the flag at these hotels. Somebody is an England football international that's obviously very patriotic, and the flag means something to him. He
mm,
chose just to not make it a conversation, to say in his businesses, we just won't have the flag there because I don't think it's being used for the reasons that I believe it should be there for.
mm.
Not everybody can take that type of bold move, right? Particularly if it's in that local sort of village. So going back to your question, that I think it's hard around that whole idea around the emotional journey that people are going to go on, and people are going to come and meet that from very different sort of perspectives. But what's the advice I give? I don't think you even asked me for advice, but I do think there's something in there around people shouldn't be invited to be part of this conversation. They should be proactive and start to give themselves and other people permission to belong in part of that conversation. That's why I think these type of conversations are important to get out there. If
Yeah.
it inspires one person to think slightly differently about what they're seeing in their local communities or what agency they have to do something about it, and I'm all for that too.
This kind of goes in really nicely to the next question that I had for you. And I actually worded it by saying, what mindset or tools help underrepresented people keep moving forward? But I think we can probably broaden this out and just say, what mindset and tools can people have and keep moving forward during these times? I think that it's important to talk about people as a whole rather than just underrepresented people, because I think that you made a really good point that this is affecting the unsettling times is uncomfortable for a lot of people, not just underrepresented people. So I don't know if you have anything that you can kind of share about what mindset and tools people can can take on board during this time to move forward.
I think I'll probably start with, if you sort of think about the context of our conversation and this show, like roots to resilience. I think the first thing that comes to mind is resilience probably isn't enough by itself,
Mm,
which is when you sort of think about the context of what resilience is, what does it mean? But if we go back to where maybe some of this conversation started, there's a whole idea about the world being unfair and systems don't change. And if you stay resolute in maybe the atypical mindset of what resilience is, what I see is people burning out, people who genuinely feel like they're banging their head against a brick wall and not seeing change, really struggling to adapt to the rules which are broken in the first place, right?
mm,
So I suppose going back to your question, the opportunity is, how do you help to rewrite some of the broken rules? How do you make sure that you hold your ideas lightly enough to be able to change them? How do you make sure that you stay part of the conversation? I think it's really easy when you're frustrated and annoyed and feel like you're wrong done to act out, to share the pain that you're in. And don't get me wrong, I think it's important to feel your feelings. But beyond like those outbursts of pain, often what I've seen is it's the quiet conversations that start to make an impact, and you have to stay in the game to be there for those conversations. So I think that's some of what I'd have in mind. And when I sort of think about that whole idea about community, that's kind of what it is. Like you've got to sort of start by try and find a way to meet people where they are, understand them enough so you can potentially either influence them through your words or your actions.
Mm.
I think that's some of the game. So if it's mindsets, it very much is in that growth mindset perspective around how do we engage with issues, challenges, or other people, or particularly when those people are the issues or the challenges. But you need to be part of the conversation to affect change.
And that's exactly what you do with the Black Sherpa, isn't it? You've got a community of people, and that's exactly you're trying to empower this community of people that may have felt underrepresented previously, and you're trying to give them the tools to make sure that they can move forward, they can step up, they can step into their greatness because we all have that, right? So, can you just share a bit about what kind of support you're giving to your community, what kind of tools they're learning, and how it's making an impact for them?
Yeah, I, I've got to be careful with my promises. I can't and I don't want to make people not feel underrepresented. I think, where we are today, people are underrepresented. What I do want to do is, as you said, is help them to step into their greatness. I want to recognize that if you are underrepresented, data, my personal experience, and the experience of lots of other people show that opportunity isn't equitably distributed. And we see that in many organizations. And I think where I try and play a small role in affecting change beyond the organizational bit is being able to create spaces where individuals can start to address that. And I do that in a couple of simple ways. I focus on how we help individuals to build a level of understanding across three key areas: self-awareness, understanding who they are, why they are like they are, and how that shows up in the way that they live. And some of living is working. Help them to get clarity around what they want, what it means to them, and how they can go about it. I spend time helping people to build organizational or business savviness. So when we think about the organizations that they work for, how do they understand how power, privilege, and politics work? Who makes choices and decisions? More importantly, so they can relate to them, they can feed into them and be part of positive solutions, or they can have an opinion about them, or if they don't really suit them, they can make choices about how and where they want to work. And if you get like some really good quality context around one and two, you get the opportunity to play with the third area that we focus on, which is visibility and influence. You can start to make some really interesting and empowering choices about your work. And I think for me, there's an element around, how do you get ahead, which I think a lot of people are racing to the top of the mountain. But for me, it's always about the journey. And I think sometimes actually helping people find joy in the work that they're doing right now is the step that helps them to get ahead, or helping them find a clear relationship to what they deliver and what their organizations or business value is the step to help them get ahead. So we just try and slow things down enough for people to build that clarity, confidence, and use the power of community to really keep people going. So members of my community get access to the tools and resources that we create. We host regular masterclasses on what I call the unwritten curriculum. So all those little things that successful people do, but you've got to be in the right room to get like an insight of them. So we're trying to open that out to people. And then the third thing that I do, and probably one of the things that I love the most, is genuinely activate a community through group mentoring. So we take the time to help real people explore real issues or challenges in a way that's productive and in a safe environment where they can build the type of confidence that means when they go into the real world or wherever they're paid, they can again act with that clarity and confidence. So exploring those issues in a way that helps them to figure out what those next small steps are that allow them to be successful. So that's a little bit of a view into some of the stuff that's going inside of our paid community for supporting underrepresented talent. we focus predominantly on the life sciences sector, but we also have members outside of that. And ultimately, I hope as it grows, it becomes something that doesn't just sit in that space, but that's an area that I know really well. I'm very passionate about and hoping to grow in.
There were two things that I was thinking when you were explaining about the work that you do with the community that you have built. And the first thing I was thinking was you're basically allowing these people to feel a sense of empowerment, which I've said before, but also be solution focused. And one of the things that came into my mind was is that there may be some degree of um, certain groups of people that have come from underrepresented backgrounds that don't have that mindset because we have always felt injustice or maybe had a victim mindset. Would you agree that that's probably true?
For some, when I sort of think about these type of people, we're not monolith, and I often sort of say in the space that I'm creating and designing, it genuinely is about inclusion. And you know, the community that I have isn't necessarily just people from minority backgrounds, got talented people from all spaces. When I think about underrepresented, that serves, and it's really purposefully a really broad perspective. And actually, even if you're not underrepresented, you don't see yourself in that way. If you understand the issues or challenges, knowing that some people have to face invisible barriers to be able to be successful and progress, and you want to be an ally of that, you're welcome in the spaces that I'm designing and creating too. But when I sort of think about the pain that you talk to, yeah, everybody's feeling that. And I suppose for me, like the opportunity is to give that a space to play out, which people don't often get. Like it's high risk and high stakes. If you're in the workplace and you've got pain around something that you really need to sort of get out, who do you talk to? Not everybody has that right relationship with a manager. Not everybody has, let's even say, like an engaged friendship group outside of work where they can have those conversations, because actually the focus of the work they do maybe feels so different that it's hard to get that space and time to really talk through that type of thing. And let's really be real, we live in a world where we're painting the most positive picture of everything that's going on, right? Because that's what we see on our platforms and through the algorithms and social media that we run. But where I see this in the workplace and where I think it's a problem and an issue is people do vent the frustrations, and often they vent the frustrations to other people that feel the same as them or have had the same experiences as them. And that feels good because somebody else is like you. But my concern and my frustration, the thing that I've seen is that doesn't give you the opportunity to bounce back or ricochet back like we talked about earlier on, because you feel comfortable in the pain and actually that just amplifies it. And
Yeah.
some of what I have in mind is actually how do we create a space where people are more proactive, where people are focused on the solutions as you talked to earlier on, so you can get that pain out, but then start to sort of think about, okay, what are the next steps that could take me to where I'm going to go? And how do I make sure I've got the confidence to take them? And that to me is what it's all about. So again, people have got to have that space where they can get it out, and I think that's really important. But in the space that I'm building, I'm asking for people to come ready to address that. You get whatever's out of your mind out there, or once you've got it out, let's start to think proactively about how you can potentially start to address it.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. I think that's I agree with that and I support that. I think that's definitely what we should be doing. I think that you're right about letting out your pain and talking to the people that will feel it, because then it feels like it's validation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Validation for your pain. And it's natural to do that. It's natural to seek that. But yeah, let's try and shift it a little bit to being more solution focused rather than reliving that pain over and over again, which can feel good. Let's agree we're addicted to that sometimes, and we can't let it go. There is an attachment to that. So yeah, this goes in nicely to my next question. How can others? I know that you're doing this really well for your community, but if you had to give a piece of advice to the listeners now, if they're feeling outraged or fearful or anger, how can they channel that into compassion and allyship? What tools do they have right now?
I think I'd start by saying I come from an African background, so there's no beating about the bush around certain topics, and tough love is something that I've grown with, and it's important to me. And with that in mind, you know, compassion shouldn't mean being gentle all the time, which I think sometimes it's easy to fall into that space. Sometimes the truth needs to be uncomfortable to create the conditions for change.
Mm.
So the truth becomes an interesting thing around actually where do you get the truth? Who's who's brave enough to ask for the truth? Who's brave enough to give it to you? And I think those are some of the things that start to make real communities really valuable. Um, Anger isn't the problem. I don't think anger is the problem. It's what we do with it that is, taking the space to be able to recognize it. We talked about earlier on that whole idea of how do we name what's going on, but once you've named it, how do you then move to what can I do about it?
Mm.
And then if we can layer on top of that, who should I be doing that with? That's where community starts to come to the fore, because I think it's really easy to think that you need to deal with all of this stuff by yourself. And when I sort of think about minority communities, um, we're taught that from a very early age. I often sort of think about the fact that I've got a young family, I've got two young kids, and when I sort of think about some of the lessons I had, particularly around as a black man, you need to work 10 times as hard to get the same as the white guy next to you, like to an extent. But actually, it's more about how do you work smart to get that thing, because everybody's working hard. Anybody that's going anywhere, like you're going to have to do the work. You get your head around that. But I think those type of messages are almost some of what push people into this whole idea of I've got to do it by myself. This is my thing. I personally need to work 10 times as hard. That 10 times as smart might mean you've got the right people around you that gets the output. It gives you the space and time to do these things a lot more effectively. So that little question beyond what can I do personally to actually who should I be doing this with, that completely starts to change the perspective. And then what's interesting is you start to see allyship. Because I think there's this whole idea about people screaming and shouting that we need allies, or people should be better allies. The other side of that is how do we get better at calling people in so they can have the opportunity to be allies? And one of the things I often sort of see with my own experience, I often sort of think I feel really lucky that I've worked for some amazing organisations and I've had the opportunity to work with great managers, with great leaders, and for the majority of those, like if you ask them with the right context and you're clear on what you want, they're only too willing to help and support you.
Mm.
And that doesn't negate what I said earlier on about the world being unfair or not everybody getting the same opportunities. Can't fix that. But what I can focus on is how can I help individuals to ask better questions that give them the right information and knowledge so they can start making the actions that allow them to achieve their goals and their objectives. So that to me is more so, what it's all about. So how do we really get to that point? So maybe advice perspective, if I'm sort of thinking back to the question that you asked, that whole idea about real allyship, it's not like it just gets made harder potentially than it needs to be, but it's about consistency, thoughts and actions, and really the opportunities to give people the space, the time, the opportunity to be part of solutions as opposed to really getting into the context or more context of the problems. And it's not always like the really public facing stuff that we see, because I think that's what we're all craving for. But how do we create those opportunities where the real conversations are going on in the background that potentially help, even if it's just one person at a time? That to me is the thing. I think all too often there's so many people that could have a positive impact on some of the things that we see in the world, but they're not ready to act until they can do something that is amazing. That people are going to stand back and go, oh, they fixed it. This shit's not getting fixed. So it's not going to be fixed in time for my kids when they go into the workplace, or potentially even their kids. So the game has got to be about progress, not perfection. And actually, it's just really small things that can potentially have the biggest difference.
Yeah, so for you, the role of community is really big here. Like connection really matters. Would you say that the role of community is the thing that will help to build resilience during times like this?
So there's two parts to it. Yes, but actually, I think when you sort of think about the role of community, it puts it over there.
Mm.
And I suppose the thing for me is the onus on individuals to be good community members is the thing,
Okay.
because that's what starts to drive the change. You as an individual can be a good community member, and that will have an impact on people around you, and that will build a good community, as opposed to saying the community is going to be the thing that supports me. I'm going to be a good member of the community, and as a result of that, we build good community, right? Does that make any
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. But if I was a listener now thinking that I'm really like I have really strong feelings about the things that we're discussing right now, but I don't know where my community is,
Mm.
where could they go? Like, where do they start?
So yeah, really great question, and I think that's some of the hard point, right? And I think there's different types of community. I think that's something to sort of really call upon. If you're lucky enough to have good family, friends, I think it starts there. Depending on where you live, people don't go to the community centres like they used to. People don't talk to people in the shops necessarily all the time that they look to. What does that look like? I think the opportunity to go where there are good people and just test it, look for it, whether it's starting hobbies, being parts of clubs, going if you're religious, like being in the church and really being part of the community, like being in whichever of the organisations that are fundamental to your religion, start to have a big, but look for those opportunities
Mm,
to be part of community. And if we sort of think about this in the workplace, really think about how you curate what that looks like. How do you, um, above and beyond the work that you do, take the time and invest the time to make and build relationships and nurture them. And that might mean talking above and beyond the projects. If you are like most of us, you've got a phone that you use for Instagram, for LinkedIn, or whatever the case might be. Think differently about who you might want to connect to and what you might want to be able to sort of see on your feeds. I think these are all small actions that you can potentially start to take. But I know and I've seen actually position yourself for communities and where other people are.
mm,
Most people are looking for that, and some people
yeah.
hold the space for it. And if you put yourself forward, you'll find, or you're likely to find, other good people that are like you. And if you try something and you sort of think, after I've been in there for a little while, I'm not going to say these aren't good people, but if you're looking away going, these aren't my people, you don't need to stay there. Go and find your group. But some of this is about experimentation and testing. But what I do think is human connection is critical. We're not wired to carry things alone. Like that's not how we were from back in the cave days. So how do we sort of make sure that we don't allow isolation to make things that are really hard even harder or heavier? And that's not what we need right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100% because I'm quite excited that you said what you just said because of the feelings that I was feeling, I look to connect with somebody or people that I could have these kind of conversations with, and this is how our connection came to be. So we've kind of known each other, like I've seen you on LinkedIn and the work that you've done and really admired it from afar. But when those unsettling times were happening and I was starting to feel the feelings that I was feeling, I questioned myself, well, what can I do about this? And then I connected with you, and this is how we've come to make the podcast. So, this is the kind of thing that you're talking about, those small actions and small connections is the progress that we want to be making.
And as you talk through that, like I think it's such a tangible example or way to lead by example when you sort of think about the community that you're building around roots to resilience. I am what I'm doing now, the Black Sherpa as a business or an organization started as a podcast 3 years ago, and I often sort of think what I call or called a vanity project back in the days, and I say vanity project because I spent and invested my time, my money, my energy to create a podcast that wasn't generating any income, but actually it was paying me back in terms of relationships, context, information, and I never take for granted the type of relationships or opportunities that have come from being able to host an hour conversations with that people I knew or actually some of them I didn't know. And for those people that I knew, I got to know them on a level that blew my mind and actually started to set a context or a standard for how I want to communicate with people in real life. Like we we don't plan for conversations,
Mm,
not the ones that we really care about. When I sort of think about hearing people talk about the frustrations about the meeting, about the meeting, about the meeting that we have at work, we put so much effort into slides, propositions. How do we make sure we articulate our value? All of these things and all that energy goes into that space. But we don't do the same at home. We don't do the same with our loved ones, our partners, our children. We don't give them that same space, time, and respect, and all of the energy goes into the 9 to 5. And actually, you come back knowing that yeah, these people love me. They're going to love me regardless of whether I'm short with them, whether I've had a bad day, or whatever the case might be. But it sounds really sad, but like podcasting really, it changed my mindset around how do I want to relate to people that I really care
Mm.
about. And it comes from having like the space and time to sort of say, yeah, we're engaged in a conversation. I'm really going to listen to you. We're listening to each other now because we've got the microphone, we've got the headsets in, but every single word counts. You want to make sure that you're going to ask a question. And I think you're great at doing this in terms of asking the questions that your listeners want to hear. But I think that you're so good at that because you're asking the questions that you want to hear. And you know that some of your listeners will really resonate with that. But you're having to lean in to achieve that. So that to me is one of the most amazing things that comes with, community. So when we say about being a good community member, how do we make the space and time to have more of those type of conversations? And I'm not expecting everybody to sit down for an hour with everybody that they meet, but actually, how can you say hello to somebody and mean it? How can you check in every now and again and ask, how are you? And mean it, be ready for the answer, and then maybe give a little context and move on. It's all those little things over time that I think start to make a big difference.
And you make a really good point, and you made me think as well that how much value am I offering in each interaction that I'm having? Yeah, yeah, it's so true. We don't think like that, do we? So let's talk about. I was going to ask you about in the work that you do. I have an interest in the common theme that you're seeing. I think you've kind of talked about this a little bit, but the common breakthroughs as well. What are the common breakthroughs that your community are seeing through the work that you're doing?
It sounds really sad, but I always go back to like it starts with clarity. People have the opportunity to genuinely explore real issues knowing that the consequences are relatively low. I think that's part of what the psychological safety is, and ultimately what we're building up a brand is where people know that the spaces that we have are high support and high challenge. So people will be asked tough questions, but also given the space to reflect on them and come up with an opinion. And I think what happens through that is that clarity gives you the confidence to understand, well, how do I feel about this thing that I either need to do or want to do, and how do I get there? Well, what is the next steps? And I'm loving, we've been open as a community now for 90 days. We've had a couple of members that have secured new roles. And that's not
Wow.
because of me or the community, by the way, that's because of them. But I
Yeah.
know the community have played like a small part in terms of helping and supporting them. I know people regularly connect offline to talk about things that are going on in life and work. I know people are helping to create opportunities for other people. And as the community grows, that type of impact will grow. I make a habit of sharing insights and learnings from all of the education that we deliver through the Black Sherpa blog, and the conversations that I'm seeing that start, or just even the numbers of people that I'm seeing visit the blog, makes me really happy in the first instance. But knowing that we're talking about real issues, real challenges in a way that resonates with people, I think is really powerful. So those are maybe some of the little micro steps that we're seeing in terms of breakthroughs. But I talk about this knowing that it's very early days and we're very small, and I know that as we build, like the outputs will scale, which is something that keeps me very focused every day on how do I grow this community in the right way with the right people. And I've been really fortunate to start with a small number of founder members who are pouring themselves into that space to make sure that it's really valuable and a great experience for anybody that might come into that space a little bit later on as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a real big progress, even in the early, you talk about it's been in the early days, but I still feel like it's quite a big progress. And I also believe that there is a huge amount of power in community. Um, this is where we come from. We're tribal by nature, and connection is very, very important. And unfortunately, in the modern day, we lost that. So I think that what you're doing is very powerful, and I can see that even though you feel like it's still early days, there's a really big progress that is being made in these people's lives. So I really commend you for that. To on an ending note, let's go back to what does resilience mean to you personally?
Good question. Um, I think I touched on this a little bit earlier on, right? But for me, I just think resilience shouldn't be romanticized. Um, Exists because something was hard that shouldn't have been. I'm a big black guy, and it's really easy to be stoic or whatever the case might be. Flip side is, in a world where we're asking everybody to lean into vulnerability, I don't think that means that we have to share absolutely everything about ourselves. But for me, it's about, or I suppose it's not about being tough. It's about staying human when life makes it easy to shut down.
Mm.
That's what I've seen over and over again. Life gets tough and people withdraw, people quit, people stop trying. It's easier to say, you know what, I didn't try, than I failed, or this was too hard for me, it wasn't for me, it wasn't my fight, it wasn't my thing. I think some of what resilience is around, how do you address that? How do you choose to stay aligned with your values, even when it costs you something? And that's what needs to happen. Right? You stand for something. What do you stand for? Asking people what they stand for and what that looks like in real life starts to become interesting, viable in terms of how is it guiding the way that you behave, the way that you think, the way that you connect. I mean, these are some of the things that really sort of resonate with me when I start to think about the term resilience.
Mm.
Um, I mean, maybe my final point would be, it's about knowing that you don't have to do this stuff alone or by yourself, because community is what keeps me personally climbing. My reasons aren't necessarily my community, or said that my community starts at home. I've got ambitions for my family, my children, and how I want them to go on and take life on. And I think actually some of the stuff that I'm doing from a work perspective now is a really great way to role model that. But I want everybody to be self-sufficient, to be focused, to have the tools and resources that enable them to be successful, but know actually some of what's in their armory is the help and support of other good people. And in a world that's pretty shitty a lot of the time, not to forget that there's some really good people out there as well.
I'm really glad that you've kind of brought that home, what you've just said, because it's definitely something that I've had to teach myself not to do, which is, shut down and isolate when things get tough. It is my go-to pattern, if I'm being really, really honest. But I think over the years, it's exactly what resilience has meant for me. It's meant, pushing through even though things are tough, because um, 9 times out of 10, I come out of it thinking that was hard, but look at where I am now. And if I hadn't had that mindset of just keep going, I would have still been back where I was. And that's worse than where I am now. So it's always about the progress that we were talking about earlier. So thank you so much, Yam. Is there anything else you want to sort of mention or talk about that we haven't discussed already that you think is important for us to share?
Just a thank you. A thank you for holding space. A thank you for these type of conversations. I know what it takes to put yourself out in this way. And I know what it means for people that need to hear these conversations, these insights. Not everybody's gonna. I'm not gonna be the conversation for everybody, but hopefully there'll be somebody that pick this up and say, actually, that message is what I needed at that time, and it needs people like you that put that into the world. So please keep doing it. And if there's anything I can do to support and enable you, I'm definitely here for that as well. But yeah, nothing more to add. Just more of a thank you for really interesting hour. You never know what's going to happen in these conversations, but I'm leaving feeling whole, wholesome, fulfilled, happy, and yeah, really reflective. So thank you for some great questions.
Yeah, me too, Yam. And this is exactly why I started doing Route to Resilience, to connect with people like you. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. This conversation is such a reminder that resilience isn't just about surviving tough times. It's about choosing compassion, connection, and courage even when the world feels divided. If this episode resonated with you, please share, comment, and follow. And if you'd like to learn more about Yam and the Black Sherpa, you can find links in the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening to Route to Resilience. And please remember, resilience is your superpower.